I'm the only one who opposes the new terrain I-69. Well, my idea is fix it first. And we have a lot of crumbling infrastructure that needs to be fixed before we build this NAFTA highway. This I-69 project is not for Indiana. It has nothing to do with Hoosiers. The idea of saving, maybe 10 minutes, going from Evansville to Indianapolis, that doesn't warrant billions of dollars. And if we're talking about a new terrain route, we're talking, an opening bid of at least $1 billion, to get this thing off the ground. Plus eminent domain, taking people's land. They're talking about saving, maybe 10 minutes or something like that. But it isn't for Hoosiers. This is not about Hoosiers. This is about connecting, Mexico and Canada. And that is not for American business. That's not something that is going to help us out. We've been exporting jobs to Mexico and Canada. There's really not much good about it. I can't imagine why environmentalists would do anything but oppose this. I can't imagine why property rights people wouldn't be up in arms about this. And just as transportation policy goes, it makes no sense right now with diesel prices doing what they're doing, and it doesn't seem likely that that it's ever going to be a better investment to keep pumping money into this old technology, which is really what we're talking about here. This isn't rail. This isn't anything new. This is this continuation of subsidizing what killed the public transportation in this country. If we're going to do I-69, then at least try something like the 4170 plan, where you're upgrading, where you'd have to put in some overpasses. We've already got 4-lane highway. The other part is I don't think that we're going to have. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm desperately wrong about what's coming in our economy next. I have never wanted to be so wrong in my whole life. But if I'm right, we really need to prepare for some tough times. And to prepare for tough times, we fix what we have, and we put off, new construction for a while. I believe we're going to have to concentrate on the important stuff at home. It's just not critical that we do this. Well, let me just make it clear that when I say I want to get rid of DCS, I don't want to get rid of the function of DCS to protect children. There's a reason they started the agency, and I understand it, and I'm not opposed to the thinking behind it. But it's a bureaucracy that's acquired its own legislative, executive, and judicial powers. It's an agency that doesn't use due process. They can kick indoors without they can take children without warrants. For goodness sake, anything like real. The standard of evidence for these cases is pathetic. And what I really want to happen is for these to be treated with the same rigor and constitutional restraints as a criminal case. Nobody should lose anything without some kind of criminal proceedings, at least. So if there's something happens, where a child is in danger, it's always the judgment of a policeman or whoever out the first responder first to decide whether to separate the children or not. And that's not going to change whether we have the agency or not. There has to be a judgment. There has to be a trial of some kind. That's not going to change whether there's an agency or not. There's always going to be that requirement. But I want it to be constitutionally restricted such that everybody's rights are maintained, and that it's not just a drop of the pin to separate a child from parents. Because you think about the psychological damage that happens when kids and parents are separated, and then you think about the results. What has often happened is that kids end up in these circumstances in homes where nothing against foster parents, because I know some foster parents are just marvelous people, but the numbers have not been very good, and the amount of abuse, particularly the most frightening kinds of sexual abuse and so on, is very high after kids are separated from their parents. And so it's something that we really need to look at very carefully and make sure that due process, high standard of evidence, and that you don't lose your child without a criminal charge. One of the things I'm finding kind of astonishing is that the governor and perhaps Jill Long Thompson even are talking about making Indiana a immunity state in terms of paddling in schools. And this law goes beyond what, teachers already have immunity if they're responsibly paddling a kid, and if the parents didn't say, no, you can't do it. Now, what they're talking about is passing a law such that you can bruise a kid against the wishes of a parent. A parent could say, no, you don't touch my kid. An immunity state would mean that we could bruise this child in a public school and get away with it. Now, what I find ironic about this is that in DCS, the way it is right now, you bruise your kid, you could lose your child. If a parent bruises their child, you lose the child. If a public school bruises a child, it's okay. You know, what are we saying here? It's not just a double standard. What it is, you know, you've got one standard that's much, much higher, and probably impossible for parents to keep, because, you know, kids can lose, they can be parted on suspicion. And if you're bruising a child, and we don't have proper safeguards to make sure that this was a correct thing to do, you know, you're causing damage just by tearing the kids apart, you know, from the family. And I think this is horrible. They've got their own ability to make up rules on the fly. They don't even have to go through the legislature. If they have their own judges, and as of January 1st, 2009, you know, just the structure of the powers acquired by DCS means that if, you know, the bureaucracy says it's going to be this way, they've got a judgment, they pass it to the judge. If the judge disagrees, then the judge has to find funding for whatever the remedy is going to be. If they agree with DCS, then that agency pays for it. It starts to become like a bounty system, where, you know, they're getting paid money to do what? You know, draw kids into this system. It's getting worse and worse. The Constitution is there for a reason, and it should apply to every aspect of government. Nobody should lose a child. You shouldn't lose your car without, you know, some kind of criminal prosecution. Unless you did something wrong, you should not lose property. And if that doesn't apply to kids, then we got a serious problem. You know, I've heard some horrible stories. And, you know, it's not just with, you know, people I've talked to. I get emails, I get phone calls, and it breaks my heart. You know, you hear these stories, and you wonder, how could anybody not, you know, if you've got the power to do something about this and you're not listening to these stories, yeah, my goodness, what are you doing? Yeah, but that's not true either. You know, every politician in the state of Indiana, every police officer in the state of Indiana swears an oath to both the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of Indiana. All of them swear that oath. And I cannot excuse when somebody says, I have no power to do this. You swore an oath to do it. And if you're not doing it, that's just because either you didn't read the contract, which there's no excuse for that, or you're just sloughing this off, and there's no excuse for that. You know, everybody's got power to do something. If nothing else, grab a microphone and speak out. What I'm all about is putting politicians on a leash and getting people off the leash. You know, because politicians shouldn't be ruling over this. This is supposed to be our country, and we're supposed to be ruling over them. They're supposed to be public servants. You know, it's not supposed to be the other way around. I put a lot of faith in the idea that what worked better than anything else ever tried would work again. And what we did in this nation was prove that liberty works. And what our politicians have done in the intervening years is prove that politics doesn't work any better than it ever did. Politics doesn't work. It just doesn't. You know, there's a specific role for government. It's an armed thug. It's the sword of state. It's force. And you don't draw this sword of state out for no good reason. You got to keep this in the sheath. You got to just keep it on a leash. It's dangerous. And for us to think that you can harmlessly use politics for everything is foolishness.